So I sit in the seat, get comfortable, and um, she asked me in kind of broken English, why am I going to Niger? And I try to respond in a very little bit of French that I'd learned through Rosetta Stone, that I was going over there for adoption. And I end up showing her a picture on my phone of Layla. But before I could say Layla's name, she says Layla's name. She says Layla. And I thought, oh my goodness, how do you know Layla?
Welcome to When You Look, where ordinary people share their extraordinary experiences, and you get to decide, was it coincidence or God?
Terra, welcome to When You Look. So great to have you on.
Thanks, Mick. I'm so glad to be here.
Well, genuinely stoked to have you here. You got a great story to tell. We are excited to get to that. But first things first, tell us a little about yourself.
Yeah, thanks. So I am the happy wife to Jeff and mom to 4 great kids, and I work in ministry. I'm here on staff at our church, working with adults in all different kinds of capacities with small groups and things like that.
Awesome. Very, very cool. Well, thanks a bunch for telling us a little bit about yourself. Let's get into your story. But as you do that, share with us a little bit of the backstory that kind of leads up to the main event, if you will.
Sure. Yeah. So when I met my now husband, Jeff, we discovered pretty early on in our dating relationship that we both had a heart for adoption. And so we knew when we were going to get married and grow our family that adoption would be a part of that. And I think we assumed, at a young, naive age that we'd probably adopt babies. And, we didn't really know what that would look like, but assumed to be little ones. And then we started on a journey of traveling to Niger. So Jeff took a mission trip to Niger. Our church is well connected with that country. We send teams there regularly every year. And when he was there, I believe it was his second trip, he was in one of the orphanages and met a little girl named Layla. And she was 8 at the time. And when he came home, he told me about Layla, and he told me that he really felt like God said we should adopt her. And that was definitely a surprise to me, thinking about her being 8. What would that look like? We already had 2 very young children at home, 2 young biological children. And I knew that would mean breaking the birth order and, would probably give us a major, major change in our home. And so we decided that, after some prayer, that we would go down that path. And really, adoption in Niger is complicated. It's not an adoption friendly country. However, there were a few other families who were a few steps ahead of us in pursuing adoption in Niger. So that made a huge difference because they had already kind of figured out some things with the government and with the court system and made some connections with attorneys and different things like that. So that was such a blessing from the Lord. So started this journey in 2013. So I think it was around January 2013. And I won't go through all the details of that, but if you've adopted, it's like a paperwork pregnancy, they say. So you're filling out a ton of paperwork and working, a lot of phone calls and a lot of conversation with different officials and government agencies to get that figured out. So fast forward about a year and a half after that decision in January 2013 to adopt, we get to summertime 2014. And so at this point in our adoption journey, it had been almost a year and a half. We still felt like we were not very far into the process. We were pretty frustrated, honestly. We felt like, gosh, Lord, you really told us to adopt, and we really feel like you told us to adopt Layla. And we know she's in this orphanage. She's very thin. She's not, we felt like getting the type of care we would like to give her. And, we wanted her with us in our family. And so we were at a point where we'd finally received approval from the orphanage director, who had kind of relinquished his rights, his parental rights, because he did have guardianship over her. And so that was a huge blessing. So I'm at this point now where one of us has to go over to Niger to sign our part of the paperwork, which we would then be able to submit to the courts. And then the courts would decide if they would approve our parental rights, kind of receiving parental rights in Niger, would be a huge step. So, unfortunately, with a country like Niger, third world, fourth world country, you can't just sign a piece of paper and fax it over or mail it over. The infrastructure and systems there just are not that reliable. So I had to fly over. We decided I would go and I would travel with a youth team from our church that was already going so that I wouldn't travel over there alone. And it was going to be a quick trip, going to sign on behalf of Jeff and I. So at this point in the story, we fly from Virginia over to Paris, and that's a long flight. And you get in Paris at an kind of early hour in the morning, and so I'm very tired, and I'm just ready to take a long nap on our next plane trip to Niger, from Paris to Niger. And so we're getting on the plane, and one of the teammates I was traveling with, she asked if anyone would be willing to give up their aisle seat. She had a window seat. And I was the first to respond, yes, I would love a window seat because a window for me is comfortable. I can lean my head against the window and I could take that nap that I longed for.
Mhm.
So we switched. She sat in another part of the plane. And just to keep in mind, this is a Air France flight, probably 350 to 400 people, full flight. So she goes to my part of the plane and I take her seat, which is 34A. So I get over there to row 34 and I see a young woman, looks like she's probably from Niger, sitting in my seat. And I try and communicate with her and I say, 34A, and I point to myself and I point to her. She's supposed to be in 34B. And I say 34B. And she seemed to not really understand what I was saying. And I thought, forget it. I don't really want to get into an argument about seats. I'll just sit in the other seat and we'll have a peaceful journey. So I sit in the seat, get comfortable, and um, she asked me in kind of broken English, why am I going to Niger? And I try to respond in a very little bit of French that I'd learned through Rosetta Stone, that I was going over there for adoption. And I end up showing her a picture on my phone of Layla. But before I could say Layla's name, she says Layla's name. She says Layla. And I thought, oh my goodness, how do you know Layla? And so we're able to communicate back and forth and, broken English, broken French, that she actually, over the last 7 years, had lived with Layla's birth mother. And so she knew who I was. She said to me, "Oh, basically you're the American who wants to bring Layla, to America." I'm like, "Yes, that's me." And so I'm able to show her pictures of our family because I actually had a book with me that I'd put together, kind of showing our family the room Layla would have, what our home looked like, and what things we did as a family. Other extended family members. It was a book that I had planned to leave at the orphanage. I'd hoped to get it to Layla's birth mom, so that she could also, see that, because at that point, we also needed her permission, really her family's permission, for us to move forward with the adoption.
Well, let's rewind a little bit. Thank you a bunch for sharing all of that. So, the question really, I think, is about to what degree did you have access or communication with Layla's birth mom at any point leading up to this flight?
I had no communication with her. Really, the orphanage director was the only one that communicated with her very intermittently, when needed, and we couldn't even communicate with him directly. Like, if you've never been to a country like Niger, it's difficult to understand, but they do not have the same infrastructure that we do. They are not just, in front of a computer able to email in the same ways that we are. So, I mean, some people are, but in general, that's not how most of the population is living. They're just trying to get by day to day, make sure they have, food to feed their families and wood to build a fire to cook on, things like that.
Okay, and of course, mom, or maybe I shouldn't say of course, but I'm gonna presume here that mom, Layla's birth mom, does have to sign off on the adoption. Is that true?
Right. So her family, a male representative of her family had to sign off on the adoption. And
Okay.
so her parents, Layla's birth mom's parents, were both deceased. So um, her uncle was kind of the family representative who had to sign off on that.
So, Tara, what was the significance of the extended conversation that you guys had on the plane?
Yeah, so it really, well, not only did it help me to see that God was really in the details, but I really believed that it helped Layla's birth mom and her community, kind of her people, to put a face to a name of this American woman they had heard about, and to see, for her friend who I was interacting with, to really see that I was normal and welcoming and loving, and like I'd prepared these things for Layla, and I was bringing these things for Layla, and I think that it just expressed to her, oh, she really, has developed this love for Layla, this person that, this young girl that she had known really since Layla was a baby. And so I really believe that that helped for her birth mom and her birth mom's family to feel comfortable with moving forward with that. And then from our side, it helped us to really get a better picture of Layla's birth mom. So Layla's birth mom was 13 when she gave birth to Layla. She was an orphan herself. She had lost both of her parents. And so I think it could be easy to judge someone who decides to give up their child for adoption. Uh, and I certainly am so glad after meeting her friend, I really just helped me to see her in just, as another human, a human doing the best that she could, with what she had in the place that she was living. And so it definitely removed that judgment, convicted me of that judgment, and gave me just a sense of gratitude for her and her willingness to say yes to the adoption. That was a huge deal. She didn't have to do that. So I could see that she was really just continuing to do the best that she could and give Layla the best that she thought, would really set Layla up for a better life. And her saying yes to that, yes to us, was huge for Layla, for us, for that whole journey.
Well, you mentioned moments ago, though, that God was in the details, that he cared about the details. Tell us what you meant by that.
Just the fact that God would put me in this place on the plane in row 34 where I wasn't supposed to sit, next to a woman who knew her birth mom. Like, that is, only God can do that. She could have been on a flight the day before. I could have sat in the seat that I was assigned to sit in. Uh, and so I just think, how can that not be God? When you think about the billions of people in the world and the hundreds of people on that flight, only God can do that.
Praise God. Right on. Right on. So let's quite literally share the rest of the story, if you will, from after the plane lands. What is the rest of that trip like for you in country?
Yeah, the rest of the trip was, it was really sweet. We signed the paperwork, of course, but really I was able to spend some time with Layla, really just be mom to her, and over a few days by um, bringing her clothes that she could wear and helping her brush her teeth and watching a movie with her, playing games with her, letting her swim in our friend's pool, something I don't know that she'd ever gotten to do. So we were just really able to connect. And I needed that connection, because little did I know that it would still be almost a year before we would be able to bring her back home. So it wasn't until summer 2015 that we were finally able, we got the yes after so many hurdles. We were able to, fly over, kind of finish out things with the embassy and the courts in Niger and bring her home. So, um, having had that interaction on the airplane and being in that seat next to her birth mom's friend, really helped, I think, encourage our faith for that year, that we would have to continue to wait and continue to um, just see if this adoption was really going to happen. So I'm so thankful for that moment, because it really did help me see that, okay, God is working in this situation. He really did tell us to adopt and did tell us to adopt her. And so I can trust him with his timing, and I can trust him with the wait. And, I don't know, it just gave us that encouragement we really needed to get through that next year, because it was almost 2.5 years that it took to bring her home to America.
Yeah, which is quite a long time.
Yeah.
Um,
And really, we thought, at that time when we finally got her home, we were like, "Yes, mission accomplished." And little did we know that was really just the mission getting started. It's been now this summer, it'll be 10 years that she's been home and in our family. And what a journey that has been, of a lot of highs and lows. Like I mentioned before, we definitely, when we considered adoption, we really didn't consider an older child. And there are a lot of things that come with that that can be challenging. And so, as I look back over these last almost 10 years, I'm thankful, though. I'm really thankful, because her joining our family has really been a catalyst for my faith and my husband's faith, because it's forced us in some ways to pursue the Lord, um, trust his process in ways that we've never had to. Um, and so it's been a beautiful, hard, but worthwhile ride.
yeah, tell us a little bit more about why you've had to pursue the Lord, perhaps differently, if you will,
Hmm.
than um, what you perceive to be otherwise if you didn't have Layla in the family.
Well, she certainly entered our home with a lot of trauma. She entered our home not knowing English, not knowing what it was like to be a part of a family. Uh, she entered the American culture, having come from a very, very different culture. Here in America, we set goals and we have responsibilities, and we follow routines and a structure. And life in an African orphanage does not really contain any of those things. You're just trying to survive. And so that was the life she had lived, was a life of survival and just trying to get through the day and protect herself in some instances, and in the orphanage. So she brings kind of all of those feelings and habits and frameworks into our home. So there was a lot of that we had to work with the Lord on, kind of rewiring. We need to rewire the way you think about this. We need to, really kind of orient you to what it's like to be in a family and the beauty of that, and some of the challenge of that, being accountable to one another and loving someone even when it's hard. And so, um, all of those things required a lot of patience that we didn't have on our own. And so we had to be on our knees. We had to ask the Lord for help. We had to invite God's people to come alongside us and to help us in some of those really, really hard moments where we just felt stuck. Um, and praise the Lord, we are in a better place than we were just a year ago. So I can look back over the years and see how He has slowly not just changed her, but changed us in the process.
Yeah, thanks for sharing about that. Let's come back, though, to something that you said towards the beginning. And that was that Jeff met Layla on a trip and felt compelled to begin the adoption process. How did you get on board with that?
Yeah. Well, I think the Lord had really primed my heart already because he had put adoption on our hearts.
Mm-hmm.
Like I mentioned before we were even married, we knew that. So I was already ready to consider adoption. At the time, I didn't really know what that would look like. And so, um, yeah, it was pretty easy for me to get on board, honestly. After some prayer and knowing we had a few other couples that were pursuing adoption in Niger, that certainly helped because it felt like, okay, we've got some um, camaraderie there in terms of parents that are pursuing this path, which was unusual for a country like Niger. So, um, yeah, and I trusted Jeff. I trusted he heard from the Lord. So that helped as well.
Yeah, awesome. Well, let's round the conversation out, Tara, with these two questions that we asked of all of our guests. So the first one is, was it coincidence or God?
100% God. God was all over that moment and that whole adoption.
Yeah, right on. And tell us, how has your life been impacted, or how has your life changed as a result of everything that you've shared?
I think that it has changed in the sense that I see that God is in all of the details of our life, that he doesn't just care about the big things, the grand things like, am I going to move to this state? Or, um, should I marry this person? Should I go back to college? But really, he's in the little details of our life if we will just pay attention, right? And if we will just, you know, yeah, be obedient and watch and see kind of the story that he's weaving in our lives. And so now I would say my perspective is I'm paying more attention and I'm looking to see how the Lord is working in my day to day life because I don't want to miss it. Because when I miss it, I miss him and that impacts my relationship with him. So, yeah, so it was a huge encouragement to just that moment on the airplane, that conversation, that really God orchestrated seating arrangement on that Air France flight uh, was just a huge shift for us, not just in the adoption, but in how we saw God work in our everyday lives.
I think you just said, because I'm going to try and quote this as best I can, because you just said it, but you said, when I miss it, I miss him. And that impacts my relationship with him. And I think there's a lot of power in those three sentences.
Mm,
So thank you for sharing.
yes, my pleasure.
Tara, it's been a real pleasure having you on When You Look. Thank you so much for sharing your story. We'll catch up with you soon. Thanks again.
Thanks, Mick.
Well, there you have it. Was it coincidence or God? You decide for yourself, but I believe you just heard a story for his glory. When You Look is powered by the stories that guests share. So if you have a story to tell, let us know by going to whenyoulook.com and click on Be a Guest, or click on the link in the description below. Please subscribe to the channel, like this video, tell us what you think in the comments, and share it with somebody that will be impacted by the story. Thanks and God bless.